9 hours after Japan's sneak attack at Pearl Harbor, Japan attacked and heavily damaged America's Clark Air Base in the Philippines. MacArthur retreated but proclaimed, "I shall return." In order to contain the Japanese army and win more time for America and Australia to mobilize for war, a group of American soldiers in Bataan fought for 4 months, despite no supplies and a lack of weapons. They eventually surrendered, which was unprecedented in American history. However, nobody expected the Japanese army would treat the prisoners of war so cruelly. Due to a lack of food and water, about 80,000 American and Philippine soldiers were forced to walk 120 kilometers to reach a prison camp. About 15,000 prisoners died on the way. American veteran Lester Tenney survived the Battan Death March. In his book, My Hitch in Hell, he recalls, "We all suffered psychological damage after our surrender, and then helplessly watched our buddies being killed right in front of us, powerless to stop the slaughter, and always fearful that we would be next." This is the Battan Death March, which together with the Nanjing Massacre and the Death Railway are referred to as the 3 atrocities in the Far East. Atsumi Aiko is a professor at the university who has dedicated herself to the study of B and C class war criminals, as well as the maltreatment of POWs. In her office are displayed the historical materials she has collected throughout the years. Through her research, Utsumi says torturing prisoners of war runs deep in the Japanese army and was related to military propaganda.
1941年、東條英機があまりにも乱れた兵士の軍紀、それを正すために先人訓というのを出します。その中に捕虜に関する項目があります。生きて領袖の恥ずかしめを受けず、そういう教えを兵士たちに教えます。ですから捕虜監視員になった人に聞くと、自分たちはね、死んでもね、捕虜になってはいけないと教わったのに、目の前にいる捕虜の人たちはみんな堂々としてるんですね。将校が威張ってるとやっぱりカッときたり、そういう人もいるし、とにかく働かせないといけないから将校も働かせようとする。それでこういうふうにトラブルが起こる。
At the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, a data map was displayed. On it was marked the number of people who were tortured to death in the Philippines, about 23,000 American soldiers and 91,000 Filipino civilians.
In Germany and Italy, 142,319 British prisoners of war were reported captured, and of those, 7,310, or 5.1%, were killed or died in captivity. 50,016 British prisoners of war were in the power of the Japanese, and of these 12,433, or 24.8%, were killed or died in captivity. Prisoners of war had no rights whatever.
Samuel B. Moody, a survivor of the Battan Death March, was the first to appear in court as a witness.
We were treated throughout the march by the Japanese very badly. We were beaten, the men were bayoneted, stabbed, they were kicked with the hobnail boots.
In the case of the Battan Death March, though, the prisoners of war were made to march for many days from the place of surrender to the place of internment. The Japanese, they were not prepared to provide for these individuals. When seeing these POWs not following the orders to march, they would be beaten, summarily executed. These individuals were never properly fed because the Japanese weren't prepared to do that.
Yes, I realized I was still alive, but pretended to be dead and fell over on my right side.
Colin Fleming Bryan, a 23-year-old Australian POW, was captured in Singapore. He was lashed in the neck by a Japanese soldier and narrowly escaped death. He showed his wound in court during the tribunal
輸送していますか、全部どうでしょう。
Sister Vivian Bullwinkle, who served as a nurse in the Australian Army, testified about what the Japanese did on Banks Islands.
They then ordered the 23 of us to march into the sea. We had gone a few yards into the water when they commenced to machine gun from behind. I saw the girls falling one after the other when I was hit.
日本は1929年のジュネーブ条約署名はしたんだけど批准してないんです。陸軍海軍などが反対したんです。うちに向かってはジュネーブ条約を日本が批准しているなんてこと全然説明していません。外に向かっては巡洋を説明するから向こうはジュネーブ条約を日本は守るんだな。だからそこで今日本がよくダブルスタンダードなんです。対面鉄道を作った小隊長はジュネーブ条約知ってます。その人は大学の法学部出てますから。だけどジュネーブ条約を守ってできるような現場ではなかった。だからこの人はその板挟みになるけども命令に従って鉄道を作っていく。
Delfin Yarania was the judge representing the Philippines at the tribunal. He was also a survivor of the Battan Death March. Yarania did not appear in court while evidence about the march was presented to the tribunal. Those charged with torturing prisoners of war were tried as B or C class war criminals in other Allied tribunals. Not long after Japan's surrender, the Allies organized a Manila military court to try Japanese prisoners who committed atrocities in the Philippines during the war. Hama Masaharu, the lieutenant general who led Japan's 14th Division in its invasion of the Philippines, and Yamashita Tomoyuki, a senior general who held the post of the highest commander of the Japanese army late in the war, were brought to trial at the Manila Military Court for torturing prisoners of war. They were found guilty and sentenced to death.
In regard to the conventional war crime of the kind that the Japanese committed everywhere else the Imperial Army had occupied territory, massacres of civilians, rape of women, employment of torture, so on and so forth, I think that they knew what they had done and did not believe that they were innocent of those charges.
戦争裁判の記録、検察が出した証拠書類をずっと調べていったら6分の1は捕虜に関する書類でした。捕虜虐待をした人はこれを厳しく裁く。こういう姿勢で裁判に臨んでいく。
On April 16, 1948, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East is in session for the writing of the judgment.